Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're so excited that you all are here. My name is Dr. Natalie Bembry. I'm the Director of Student Affairs here at Rutgers School of Social Work. And I have with me my colleague, Erin Capone. We've worked together for a number of years, but we're excited to bring to you this workshop of maximizing your potential. So I will briefly introduce Erin. Erin is a graduate of Rutgers. She has her BASW from Rutgers. She has an MSW from NYU, and she is currently a DSW student here at Rutgers University. She's been in the field of development or been in the field for 15 years. And she was actually our previous director of development here at Rutgers School of Social Work. And she, I will happily say, she was our longest serving director of development, and she closed the largest gift from an individual donor in our school's history. And so she's known, Erin, she hustles and gets that money for Rutgers School of Social Work. She did as she worked with us. She has moved on and she is at NYU. But I'm going to open this up and share with you so Erin can share with you as well. And just, Erin, if you would just share just a little bit about what you do in terms of development, or even how you do the work that you do.
Yeah, and thanks so much. Natalie, you're such a great colleague. And so to have this time with you all, and you especially, is really exciting. And I think as you'll see, as we're chatting a bit, this is really important and like a passion area of mine. So anytime I get to kind of share with you all some insights that I've learned in my career, I'm happy to do that and hope it'll help for you. So what I do is called frontline fundraising. You might hear other terms like development or advancement, but at the end of the day, the work that I'm doing is how do I connect people who are philanthropic, who want to give their time, their talent, their treasure, their testimony to the institution where I work. So as Dr. Moore Bembry shared, in the past, I've worked for Rutgers, and right now I'm at my other alma mater, NYU Silver School of Social Work. And I think one thing I want to start out to kind of share with you all. So when I was an undergrad social work student, a grad student, I wanted to be clinical. It's what made me come to NYU. It's kind of known as the uber clinical school. I wanted an office with a white noise machine and a little yellow legal pad, and I was going to help the world that way. And very quickly after graduating in 2006 with my master's, I learned that I really loved learning the clinical stuff and actually really hated doing it. And I think part of why I hated doing it is my first job coming out of grad school was as a school social worker in Catholic Charities. And the way that that worked is they would place one school social worker in 4 different schools. So the caseload was just insane, right? Like it actually wasn't so achievable. And one of the things that struck me most is, I was an advanced standing student. So by the time I graduated, I was 22, about to turn 23. And I realized that I had the power in this role to make decisions for children and their families that would follow them for years. So even though I was well-intentioned in trying to help, if I got it wrong, or if I made what I thought was the right call, but it had unintended consequences, that I'd get to move on the next year, but the children and their families wouldn't. And so that really set and kind of sat heavy with me. So I found this other job soon after that one where it was about teaching social emotional learning to teachers so that they could teach it in school. Great. It's helping people. It's slightly clinical, but it's a little bit more program development. Sounds awesome. So I was there 6 months, and our executive director got fired and imprisoned for misappropriation of funds. And so they cleared the whole staff because the idea was you were either you knew and you did nothing, or you were in a position where you should have known and you were maybe asleep at the wheel. But they kept me and a couple of others because I had just gotten there 6 months. This is clearly not a criminal mastermind situation going on. But one of the folks that they had let go was the grant writer. And while I was at Rutgers, I took one grant writing course. So when they were like, does anyone know how to fundraise? I was like, oh, it's me. Like I took that class like 4 or 5 years ago. It must be me. And so I got there a job there as a director of development. And that's where I learned that my social work skills of listening and understanding what someone's goals and priorities were and connecting those to what our organization was doing, that those social work skills were really handy. But before I kind of tell you the rest of the trajectory, I'm hoping you can either pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and share it with us all. But what are some attitudes you have toward money and fundraising? Because I'll share with you in a moment the attitudes I had toward money and fundraising, but share, take a minute, think a little bit about that, and either unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
So, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Shakari.
So for me, I've always felt uncomfortable asking for money, but I do realize that it is necessary, and I have some experience being a part of youth groups, being exposed to how we would fundraise, and so I have been exposed to it, and I realize the good that it does and how necessary it is. But I remember being a young girl and feeling uncomfortable, kind of going to the fundraising events and just feeling in a way like it was an act, or like I had to kind of, promote myself. Like I guess that's the part that I didn't feel comfortable with, advocating for myself.
Thanks for sharing that.
For me, what I remember about, I guess, money and fundraising, I used to be a part of City Year, the AmeriCorps program in Philadelphia. So I think like they're just kind of giving us practice in terms of like, the elevator speech. So that's what I think about when you say money and fundraising, and knowing like who the audience is and the end goal.
Perfect. These are great. What else?
I feel similar to Jokari with feeling uncomfortable, but understanding that it's necessary. That's the only, I interned at a nonprofit, so my one supervisor, her thing was writing grants, and I didn't get to learn too much about that, but I see the importance of it, especially in social work.
Awesome. What do you think that discomfort is? Where's it coming from, or what's it about?
Hey, yeah, I would agree with that as well, that it's a little bit uncomfortable to think about. And I think mostly because it's, for me at least, and maybe others don't feel this way, but I think it's a lack of knowledge about the process too. I would like to take, while I'm in my, MSW program, take the marketing class that Rutgers does offer. I'm hoping and praying that I'll be able to fit that into my curriculum somewhere. That is yet to be foreseen, but keeping it on my radar. But yeah, it's something that, is such a different topic from so much of the clinical work that we study, that, but it's, it's obviously necessary, because we're not, many programs are not going to get all the adequate funding they need from, public sources or from, government program funding. So it's essential for the process, I think, and especially for programs to be well funded to deliver good services. I think it's, important. We have to have enough staff to, to work with all the people that we serve in whatever capacity it is. They have to have their training. But money makes things happen in a lot of ways. So I would like to know more about it, I guess, is the short answer.
That's awesome. Thanks. Go ahead, Jokari.
And I wanted to just piggyback and add that I think that the discomfort also just comes from how like we were raised. I don't know how everyone here was raised, but for me specifically, like asking for money, it just always was like a taboo. Like you don't ask, you figure everything out yourself. And I know that it's different when it comes to nonprofits, etc. But I think that conditioning is still there.
Perfect. So, you've all really hit the nail on the head about a lot of what's going on and that, we're kind of thinking about and being cognizant of. And that's, I think what you're pointing to is really the societal attitudes, right? And the values and the norms that we have around money. We don't talk about salary. We don't talk about financial troubles. There's this sense that money is taboo. So that's happening, number one. But also because money is such a driving force of power in our society, those dynamics of power and balances are just baked into any conversation about money. And so I also think too that predominantly our profession is one where we've experienced the troubles. Sometimes you'll hear that idea of like wounded healers or wounded warriors. We ourselves have likely experienced something that even drove us to the field in the first place. And so when you put on top of that, kind of coming and seeing those issues and then throwing in more power and balance, that can also be a lot. And so I think it's really important to mention it because I'll share with you that, like I shared with you earlier, I wanted to be a clinician. And so to me, the idea of doing anything like that mezzo macro stuff, that was for someone else. Like I remember teachers, professors actively like talking to us about it. I was like, yeah, like blew it out my mind. And really just didn't see that as a pathway for myself or, of any interest. And then it was because, and you'll see this in your careers, and I'm sure you've seen it in your life so far, but you're going to get dealt a hand that you can't predict. And then you're essentially just going to be trying to play that hand the best you could. So if you told me that, picture myself in your shoes, like I'm wrapping up my degrees, and if you had told me, hey, fast forward 15 years, you're going to spend the bulk of your social work career as a frontline fundraiser, I would have laughed right in your face and like told you you were crazy. And so I think you all in the introductions were talking about that idea of staying open and staying broad. And that I was jotting down, kind of in preparation for our conversation over the last week or two, just some thoughts about how do you maximize your earning potential? And that is definitely one of the things where I think you need to be open to non-traditional settings where social workers can and should be, but maybe where they're not. And so, for instance, do you know that one of our alums used to be the chief diversity officer for Apple? Do you know that Google hires social workers to help do things like figure out how algorithms can help identify things like child pornography or human trafficking, right? Like these are settings where we don't think social workers, like as social workers, we don't typically think of ourselves as belonging, but we're absolutely needed. And so I mentioned that because if we want to break down how to maximize your earning potential, I just in kind of reflection of my own case study, I see three main things you need to think about. The first thing is being really open and broad about where you see yourself being. So don't just think about your traditional nonprofit that's a social services provider. Think about where do you hold a unique perspective, a unique expertise, and who needs that perspective and that expertise, and who's paying for that expertise and that perspective. So that's number one. Be really broad about what you think about and really open. The other thing I'll share is that large institutions tend to pay more than smaller community nonprofits. And this one's a little bit tough, right? Because as social workers, we want to meet the need where we are needed most. And sometimes that is in smaller community nonprofits where the earning potential is going to be a bit less. And so you might want to make decisions for yourself. Is that a salary you can afford or it's not? And maybe what you can do then is you're maybe going to pursue employment in a large institution, but then you're going to donate your time and your talent to a smaller institution. So that's one thing I do, for instance. I've worked at large institutions now for over 7 years, but I provide pro bono consulting to small nonprofits in my community, because that's how I figure I can still be of help while making sure that I'm able to survive. I am going to talk with you all about some hard numbers in a second, just so you can get a sense of like my own case study of what it is that I'm talking about. But the other thing of the third point is you have to figure out how to be a revenue center and not a cost center. And so like, what do those terms even mean? So a revenue center is anything that draws dollars into the organization, and a cost center is anything that drives them out from the organization. So if you're a service provider, like a clinician, in an organization that has a model where you're billing, let's say insurance companies, you're bringing revenue in. The work you do brings revenue in. I'm a frontline fundraiser. I bring revenue into the organization. But let's say I was working at a small nonprofit and I was doing parent education in the community. I'm a cost center. It costs the organization money to cover all the things that I do. So as much as possible, and this is where we usually try to prepare social work students, that many of you are likely to be in some type of management role or position within about 2 to 3 years after you graduate at your master's level. So you're going to start to enter those revenue center positions, and you want to be on the hunt for them. They tend to pay more, and they also tend to be the ones that survive things like downsizing or layoffs, right? Because if somebody's bringing money into the organization, you're going to want to keep that person that role, as opposed to people who are driving money out of the organization. So remember that Catholic Charities job I mentioned to you all? I held that role for about 2 years in the 2006, 2008. It paid me $35,000 a year. I had barely, oh, and by the way, I left grad school. So both my undergrad and my grad, I had to finance completely through student loans. And so I left with $120,000 in student loan debt. So $35,000 annual, like operating, like annual salary, $120,000 in student loans. You don't have to be a mathematician or somebody who knows a lot about investing in economics. You can know that was hurting. So my monthly student loan payment was like $600 and $700 a month. And I was very fortunate because I was able to live at home for a bit longer. Otherwise, like there'd be no way. And I remember I had this like $50 a week food budget. If there was anything, there's no going out for food because I had to know that it was only going to be $50 a week that I had for food. So I mentioned that because it's really important that you all understand that a lot of social work students are graduating with student loan debt that meets or exceeds their starting salaries. And that's a thing that we as a profession are, and I've seen many schools of social work advocating, we need to do some advocacy work because we deserve to be paid like a living wage, but even beyond that, right? Like where a lot of you are in getting your master's degrees, like you have these high achieving degrees, you need to be paid as such. And so one of the things, Anna Haley, if you ever get the opportunity to hear Anna, she's on faculty at the school, to do any type of conversation about salary negotiation interviewing, I don't care if you have to cancel, like you cancel whatever you have to do or watch the YouTube recording. And she has a few on the YouTube channel too, so check them out. She does a really great job of explaining how you advocate for salary and why. And so some of you were mentioning that idea of you understand that fundraising is necessary, but you feel weird asking. Well, salary negotiation's even worse, right? We as social workers tend to feel even worse about salary negotiation. So if you can't do it for yourself, you need to do it for the communities you serve, because they're not getting quality service if you don't know how you're going to afford your bills and if you have to keep jumping job to job. So it's a social justice issue, right? Like there's a reason why social work, a profession dominated by women, serving our most the communities that are most likely to be marginalized by our society, and our communities most likely to be mistreated by our society. There's a reason why we're paid lower than other helping professions. And so this is a social justice matter. So back to kind of the case study of my career. So I'm sitting in nonprofit. I move over, like I told you, I then start entering frontline fundraising. By the time I was 27 years old, my salary crossed into 6 figures. And it hasn't left since in the fundraising. And so I share that very openly, and I hope it's received this way, because I think it's important for you to hear the numbers and realize that these salaries are not only possible, but should be part of what you're expecting to be making when you're completing your grad degree. So I want to help you all find your kind of pathways toward those salaries as well. So I do want to explain a little bit about what fundraising looks like, how it feels, and how you can actually do it. But I do want to pause and see if there's any reactions or questions. Oh, and by the way, let me share with you real quick. At all the institutions, the large ones that I've been talking about, for the beginner level roles, right? Like something, it's called a development assistant or a development associate. You know what the salary is for those, depending which institution? It's $60,000 to $90,000 for starting roles. That's literally like folks coming out of undergrad, no frontline fundraising experience, just hardworking, talented people, $60,000 to $90,000. And that's for many social workers, that's what they're looking for 3-5 years post-grad. Oh, and the name of the role is development assistant and development associate. And I'm proud to share with you all that in my years of advocacy, and this number's not going to seem big, but hey, I'll tell you a little parable in a second to explain it. But I've helped get 5 or 6 of our students jobs in frontline fundraising, and I'm happy to connect you with those folks too, so they can share their stories with you. I'm happy to do that with you. So if you want me to review your resume, if you want me to send you examples of jobs that you could and should be pursuing, I will definitely do that. I can drop my contact information in the chat after this, but please let me know how I can help you. Because it's really important. And like I said, I just got lucky that someone went to jail, which is the weirdest sentence ever. But I don't know that if he hadn't been imprisoned and that whole thing hadn't happened, I don't think I would have pursued this work, because I, 1, wouldn't have known about it, 2, would have been freaked out about money, and 3, just wouldn't have had that opening. So, so what kinds of questions or reactions are we having so far?
So I'm still trying to get my thoughts together, but that was really great insight. But with frontline fundraising, was there anything in particular, like after you graduated from graduate school, that you needed to train on or be taught, or it's something that we're going to have this skill set?
So such an awesome question, and so good for us, because it's not a codified field. So there are only a handful of formalized training programs, like within universities, for frontline fundraising, and most of them focus more on nonprofit management anyway. So to your point, there's absolutely no training you need. And so this was another point I wanted to raise with you all. Whether it's frontline fundraising or any other thing, remember how we talked about being open to other disciplines and things like that? One of the things you're going to need to do is learn how to educate people about you and about social work. Once you're outside of social work, unless like your mom, your friend, your aunt is in social work, you have no idea what social work is. Think about other professions. Like if I ask you to drill down on what a computer engineer does, you're like, engineers, computers? Like you don't know the nitty gritty of other fields. And social work is not only the same in that way, but it's actually a little bit more complicated because of how it's evolved, and people have this kind of common perception of social workers as child welfare workers that take kids, right? And so as social workers, our field needs to do a better job with its PR. So to your point, Gabby, you don't actually need any different skills. And when I tell you a little bit about how I do what I do, you'll see that your social work training prepares you very well for this. What you're going to need to do is be able to explain to hiring managers why and how that is. Yeah. Go ahead, Jakari.
So I wanted to ask, because I never really considered myself an academic, but I have heard a lot of people recommend getting your MSW. So would you say that it's is it possible to earn six figures with your BSW, or would you recommend MSW or higher?
And so I feel like there's a couple of pieces to it, and I'll speak about just broadly our society. Our society is leaning toward the idea that graduate level education is like the entry into professional positions, right? And part of that is, as a society, the more education becomes accessible, it also means that there are more people with those degrees, and therefore then the edge requires a higher degree, right? So it used to be a high school degree could get you entry into a profession. Then it was a college, like your bachelor's degree or an associate's. And now we're really seeing up toward masters. And you're talking to somebody who's sitting in a doctoral program right now, so that idea. And by the way, I only did that because there was tuition remission, right? So it's the other benefit of working in higher ed, for instance, is you can go get that degree. So I would say I would highly recommend you pursue a master's degree, but I would be very mindful of what the cost of that is and how you're going to finance that, right? Because as we said, like even with grad degrees, you see social workers with starting salaries somewhere about $50,000 or $60,000. So what I would do if I could do it all over again is, and it's funny because Rutgers, for instance, happens to be one of the largest employers of our alumni. I don't know the answer right now for Silver School of Social Work, but I would think it would be the same thing. But if you can get a job in an institution of higher education, then you can get your master's degree for free. And so I would say definitely pursue it, but I would find employers who are willing to cover all or part of that cost. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, yes. So I put my question in the chat, but I was wondering if you might be able to kind of like expand like on it. So with like the whole public service loan forgiveness program, where it's like you work 10 years in either like nonprofit, government, university setting, and then after 10 years of payments, like they forgive your loans. I was kind of like wondering with like graduates that have like substantial amounts of debt, is it better to do that or kind of like look at the private sector for like higher paying jobs just starting out?
Yeah, so here's what I would say to that. If you can get a private sector job that you feel fulfilled and it is in line with your personal mission, because you don't want your soul to be drained. And I think you can have both, right? So I'm not saying, oh, pick fulfillment or money, right? Like you should be able to have both. But the reason why I say that too is there's a couple of things about those loan forgiveness programs. You have to have 10 years of consecutive payments in a row, not one late, not by a day. So you have to every month pay that loan, or else you have to start back over again. And a lot of them are on qualifying federal loans. And I don't know about you all, but of my $120,000 in student loan debt, it was predominantly me and my best friend, Sally Mae, that I had that loan debt through. I think I had just about 10 or 15% of my total student loan debt was federal loans, which is what would be forgiven by most of those programs. And with private companies, not only is your earning potential higher, but things like your retirement accounts, if there are stock options, there are not only higher annual salaries, but then related benefits. And so like, I'll give you an example too, even at this institution of higher ed where I'm in, they put 5% toward my retirement, no matter what I do. then on top of that, if I put 5%, if I pay 5%, they match an additional 5%. So it means that 15% of my annual salary is going towards my retirement, but only 5% is actual money of mine, right? So it's 10% more that I get. That's something out of a small nonprofit. You'll be lucky if they have retirement funds that you can contribute to, let alone matching. But even at Rutgers, it was a similar arrangement. It was, if I put in 5%, they put in 8%. So your health insurance is better too in larger institutions. So not only is your salary higher and your pension's higher, but the cost that your out-of-pocket costs for your healthcare are going to substantially be lower because they can negotiate better rates because they're a larger employer. And I've felt fulfilled every day of the work I do. I didn't feel like I sold my soul. And to be quite honest with you, it wasn't until coming into higher ed and fundraising for school of social work that I saw how these things aligned. And that's actually what propelled me to go pursue a doctoral degree, because there's not fundraising scholars predominantly. There's not a lot of conversation about these social justice issues, right? So when I raise a scholarship, if I make it so that you can only use it for tuition, like if the donor and I sit down and we say it's only for tuition, but you have your tuition covered, you need money to get to fields, you need money because your car broke down, you need money for books. If I'm not knowing what the struggle is like, I can't advocate, and then I'm closing gifts that actually are against student needs. Or what about the idea that if you get a scholarship, should you automatically be required to meet with the donor? What if you don't want to share your history and why you got into this field? What if you're unable to meet with that person? Who's advocating for you? And so I mention that because I think that there are social justice implications for these other like non-traditional social work roles where we need to be present. So not only can we earn more doing it, but we can actually advance social justice in places that they're not expecting to see a social worker. Yeah.
Erin, if I could jump in, because when Lauren asked about that with the loan forgiveness, and when I worked in child welfare, that was like, everyone's like, oh, you can do the loan forgiveness. And just as you said, Erin, it was like the loan that I could pay off with a paycheck. Like that was the loan that they were like, you have to work, 5 years and sell your soul to pay off. And that's one that I could have paid with a paycheck. But all my private loans were not eligible for that piece. So that was just something to think about. Like, I know a lot of people talk about the loan forgiveness, but you are putting in a bulk of time for a loan that may be like $1,500. And you're like, I just lost 10 years for that. So just something to think about when you think about the loan forgiveness piece.
Yeah, that's why. And I also think there's, to Dr. Moore-Bembry's point, there's also like this social justice thing about like, what are we putting people through to afford to get this loan forgiveness? That's not even the whole thing. But also like, how did they amass this student loan debt in the first place? And are we tethering people to jobs that are not going to then pay them well? And so for me, I don't want to be on someone's good graces. Like you even see conversation in the news about people complaining about loan forgiveness because they are like, I had to work hard too to finance my degree. And I understand that. But why is it so expensive? And why is that need felt disproportionately by communities? And oh, by the way, I ran the numbers once because I was tired of people in my family telling me to work my way through school. So in 1972, the cost of a degree at the institution and the minimum wage were such that you could work 10 hours per week at a minimum wage job and you could cover tuition. Okay, doable, right? You know what you'd have to work now at minimum wage? 60 hours a week. Nobody has 60 hours a week to finance just the tuition of their degree, number one. But number two, you're social work students. You're already working a free part-time job because of the nature of our field, which is field placement. And no, I learned my skills in my field assignments. You find, I'm sure many of you feel that way, the way you're going to cut your teeth. So it's not to disrespect field, but it's also to be real. Like you already made the sacrifice. So what now? Somebody's going to forgive your loans if you make every payment for 10 years, if you stay in that nonprofit sector, if, I'd rather work for a company where I get paid more and I get to decide how I want to use that money. But also then I get to invest it and it gets to compound and grow for me over time. So that's the other thing. Not only can I pay off my loan, but then my earning power and my wealth, my salary increases every year. Most salary increases are a percentage. That's why salary negotiation is so important, because it's not just that money at the time you take a job. Everything else then depends on what that base salary was that you negotiated. So, okay, so let me explain, and because we have until 1, is that right? Yeah, okay. So real quick, what is actual frontline fundraising? So frontline fundraising is the strategic use of self to move someone along in their philanthropic process. So most of my days look like meeting with donors and learning 3 really important things initially, and then 3 really important things over a period of time. So the 3 really important things that I learned all through conversation, all through strategic use of questions on my part, are they philanthropic, which means do they like to give money away? Do they like us? And do they want to be philanthropic with us? Because if the answer to any of those things is no, then I don't have a prospect, right? Once I know I have a prospect, which means they like us, they want to be philanthropic with us, and they are philanthropic, the next thing that I'm learning is usually these 3 other main parts, which is what purpose do they want their philanthropy to achieve? What amount can they afford to do based on the impact that they want to have? And what's their timing? And once I know that, then that's the ask. So sometimes there's this sense of, I'm going to run in, I'm going to vomit an elevator pitch at somebody, and I'm going to say, would you give me $1 million? It never works that way. There's no PowerPoint deck that I click through, no fancy presentation. It usually takes, in the type of fundraising I do, which is called major gifts, which is usually where you can earn the most money. It takes about 1 year or 2 years of knowing somebody and meeting with them and using conversation and touch points throughout to move them along in their journey. And hopefully your social work education is starting to bing. These sound a lot like developmental stages. These sound a lot like treatment plans. These sound a lot like counseling and motivational interview and narrative therapy and solutions-focused therapy and a little bit of CBT, right? So you have all of these skills, you just don't know that you do, and you need to learn to talk about them so that hiring managers understand that you have these skills. So Catherine Emery, Amber Allen, Jacqueline Krausman, these are just some of the alums who are doing beautiful frontline fundraising work because they leveraged their social work degrees. And I can think of, I'm sure, and I just realized on YouTube now, making them YouTube famous on the channel, but they are people who have leveraged their social work degree for this work. And it's amazing too, because so right now the focus of my doctoral studies are what is the decision-making process of folks who've given $1 million or more. And do you know what I'm learning? Because you're like, sometimes you think, oh, millionaires and billionaires, like, scary or feeling uncomfortable. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up in a way that I feel comfortable with money. But most of the people that I've met in my career and that I'm meeting in this research that I'm doing right now grew up really poor. Like their parents barely had 2 nickels to rub together. They got very lucky in their careers. They feel other people invested in them and they want to give back. So to me, that's an act of social justice. I'm helping facilitate the equitable use of resources. I'm helping donors feel really good about a wrong that they want to right in the world. And then at the end of the day, this philanthropy gets to people like social work students, like communities, like research centers. So to me, there's nothing more social justice and social work than that, but I wouldn't have known about it if I didn't kind of like fall into it. So what questions, or does anybody have like mind blow moments? Yeah, tell me a little bit about what's kicking around for you all.
Earlier before you had mentioned that you were gonna, I think you said you were gonna mention some numbers of like different salary, if you could
Yep.
mention those.
Yep. So entry level positions for frontline fundraising are about $55,000 to $75,000. In some institutions, like a private higher ed institution, it goes up to 90. And remember, this means undergraduate degree, hardworking, organized, detail oriented. Boom, that's your starting salary. And for social work land, that means grad degree. Like you've had to go through this process. Then once you have a few years in that role, usually about 2 or 3 is a good amount of time, you can then do something called an assistant director of development, or sometimes it's called a leadership gift officer, which means you're working around gifts that are about $5,000 to $25,000 in range. So you need about 2 to 3 years as a development associate to do that. And then your salary is usually about $75,000 to $90,000. Then you get into associate and director of development roles. Associates tend to run between about 90 to 110,000. And I'm talking in the tri-state area for larger institutions, right? So outside of this area and maybe smaller nonprofits, the salaries are going to come low, but they're still going to be higher than like a lot of case management stuff you might find. So associates sit around 90 to 110,000. Development directors sit between about $100,000 to $120,000. And then you might get to senior director and you're like at 150,000. Here at this institution, because it's a private institution of higher education, some of those numbers I've just mentioned for you are for like New Jersey public institutions. For a private institution, then as a director of development, you're looking at clearing 200,000. Leadership in these entities clears 300,000 and 400,000, and then upwards from there. So like the idea that in just this one use of social work, let alone Google, and I have a twin brother who works at Google, so I could get you the skinny on some Google numbers if you want, but just in institutions of higher ed for this type of work, you're talking about clearing $100,000 about 3 years post degree, not even like grad degree, just degree. So those are the numbers. I got to go to China to close a gift, so you get to travel. And you get to meet really amazing people. So
I have one last question.
Mhm.
How do you feel the flexibility is with a frontline fundraising job?
So that's the fun of it. It's not a 9 to 5 job, and that has give or take, right? So there are times where I might have to attend an event in the evening, or it's kind of a busy season with events and there's going to be something on the weekend. But it also means that because it's metric driven, if I was working until 7 or 8 one night, and I'm going to roll in the next day at 10 or 11, there's a lot of like that work-life balance flexibility. I will share with you. So I have my full-time job. I'm in the DSW program. I'm a part-time lecturer. Doug, I teach that one of the sections of that fundraising and marketing course you mentioned. And I have a 7 and 10-year-old. I have a partner. I have friends. I have a full life. So it's definitely like you can hold all these things. I serve on nonprofit boards, and I still sleep 8 hours a night. So it's not like I'm like those crazy people who are sleeping 2 or 3 hours, and that's how they get all the stuff done. So you can do and have all these things. And I've had some type of management role now for at least the past 13 years. I've been in some type of management position in higher ed fundraising. You can do all the things.
This is good info. I love this. And we've been doing these niche career little presentations just to give people a difference, to see different in social work and don't feel like you're stuck with just being, working at an agency or doing something like that. There's so much that you can do in social work. And I love this because who ever thought that fundraising would be someplace that you could be like, oh, I can get some things in here. So I love this. This is really good. And I love your questions and things like that. And I do want to be respectful of your time because I saw that it is after. But if you have questions, you can always reach out. I'm the one who sent you the emails stalking y'all this morning, like, don't forget you signed up. Um, so you can always reach out, and Erin just put her email in the chat as well. So it's just a good way. And if you want to join us, we have another one on Friday, and we're going to be talking about political social work. So another area that's untapped, but it's so necessary and so needed for social workers to be in there. And we're not just talking about running for offices. Like, I mean, you could be campaign managers, you could be constituent service directors. I mean, there's so much in there that you can do. And I just really feel like in social work, we're always almost like told, like, here's the jobs you can do. But there's so much we can do that we're not really put before us. Like, we just kind of hear, like, just agency, child welfare, some state positions, but there's so many other things you can get into. So that's really the reason why we been holding these sessions, and they've been working really well. So people can hear different areas. But I do want to be respectful of your time because I know we went over, but if you have questions, feel free to reach out. And then feel free to join us on Friday too, to do more discussions on political social work and kind of just get an understanding too. But Erin, do you have something you wanted to add there?
Just two last things. Friday's
go ahead.
facilitator is amazing. So even if you're like, no political social worker, just go to hear her, because Dr. Moore Bembry and the Friday speaker are just like, the world shakes when they're together in a room. So like, if I can log in, I'm gonna go catch that talk. So definitely check that one out. And then let me know how I can help. Like, I mean it so seriously. Like, I dropped my email in the chat. I'm still floating around the institution as a student and a part-time lecturer. You can find my other work email. Hunt me down, find me. I will help you with your cover letter, your resume. I'll listen to you talk about things and maybe try to figure some stuff out. If you're looking for fundraising, I'll connect you with opportunities. But it's kind of my personal mission. Like, I want everybody earning a salary that they are proud of and not can survive on, like you can thrive on. So if I can help you do that, I want to be a part of that. Go ahead, Janina.
I was just saying in reference of Friday, that's also my professor. She is fantastic.
Amazing.
I love
Yes.
yeah. So I'm gonna be there for the other student, just sign in. She's just great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So enjoy. But thank you all for sharing time and space with me today. I appreciate you all and all the expertise you are. And I feel really, really proud to be colleagues with you in the field. And our world needs you, our field needs you, your clients need you. So however I can help you along that way, let me know. And if you're ever at an agency and someone gets imprisoned, it's not necessarily a bad thing for you. All right.